Drew, it's great to have you back on the show.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for having me on, guys. I very much appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, so, you were just arrested in Australia, mind you, for criticizing the head of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping. Why don't you tell us what happened?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's been a wild ride these past few years. I think the last time we spoke, I was battling expulsion from my university because I had I'd challenged the university authorities about their relationship with the Chinese government, and they had basically gone all out in an effort to expel me. They spent about $500,000 trying to expel me. They brought in the top law firms in Australia. There was ultimately a parliamentary inquiry. It was a big fracas. So I think that was the last time we spoke, where I basically was almost thrown out of university for life because of my criticism of the Chinese Communist Party in Australia. And I mean, in the intervening period, I've continued my activism and my campaigning against the CCP. I even went to Ukraine recently to deliver food and aid supplies to refugees.
I saw that.
Yeah. So I've been continuing a lot of my work, fighting against dictatorship and tyranny. And I've been running as a candidate at the upcoming Australian election. We formed a party called Democratic Alliance, and it's almost like a milk tea alliance party because we've got the first Tibetan candidates running in Australia, first Uyghur candidates, I think, ever to run anywhere in a democratic election in the West. We've got a Hong Kong freedom fighter running as well, Max Locke. So we've got this sort of milk tea alliance, and our key issue is trying to combat CCP interference in Australia, trying to raise awareness about crimes against humanity in China, speak up for these groups that have been persecuted brutally. I mean, it's a very important issue in Australia because it's our top trading partner, and people feel it very, very intensely. The intimidation that the Chinese government tries to use against Australia. I mean, last year, the Chinese government issued a list of 14 demands against Australia. Basically, they were demanding that we become a vassal state. Otherwise, we would face economic warfare. And they were demanding that we shut down the free press in Australia when it criticised the Chinese government. They were demanding the shutdown of independent think tanks and, university departments that were critical of the CCP. And when the Australian government obviously just rejected that outright, the Chinese government's response was to basically wage economic warfare against Australia, where they levelled unilateral sanctions against a range of Australian industries. A lot of Australians had their livelihoods wiped out as a result of that, and it was basically a capricious move by the Chinese Communist Party where they were just trying to bully Australia into submission. So because we had the temerity to stand up to them on the COVID pandemic, asking for a free investigation, a free inquiry into what happened, the beginning of the pandemic, how it started, how it spread from Wuhan, because we had the temerity to, back an international inquiry into that, the Chinese government basically waged economic warfare against Australia. And so it is increasingly a very big issue in Australia. We've been the canary in the coal mine a bit. When it comes to CCP interference, Australia's really at the front line. Australia and New Zealand is where the CCP first tried to use a lot of its united front tactics. It's where it first pioneered a lot of its methods by which it has tried to subvert democracies, the Western democracies, buying up industries, buying off local elites, co-opting elites. I mean, we've seen in America now the co-opting of Hollywood, the co-opting of Wall Street. So what we're seeing in America, I mean, it started really, I think, in Australia. This is where the Chinese government has really pioneered a lot of these tactics. And that's why it is this international issue, why it is so important to Australia. That's why I'm running.
No, we were in Australia in 2018 and we saw a lot of this. Do you think it's getting worse since then?
It's hard to say because on one level, the Liberal government, Scott Morrison, has been quite, strong in his rhetoric, standing up to Chinese government bullying, etc. But on another level, I mean, sometimes the actions don't match the rhetoric. So, for example, Scott Morrison speaks a very, very tough game on the CCP, and he's attacked the Labor Party opposition very strongly and harshly for, members of the He's attacked Labor MPs very strongly and harshly over some of their ties to the Chinese Communist Party, and yet he has ignored that same issue in his own party. Scott Morrison talks very, very tough on China, and yet it was his government that greenlit the sale of the Port of Darwin, this key piece of critical national security infrastructure. His government, the Liberal government, greenlit the sale of the Port of Darwin to a Chinese state-backed company. just what that means on a national security level is just incredible. I mean, selling off key pieces of national security infrastructure, the Port of Darwin. I mean, there are US troops stationed in the Northern Territory, our ally, and they've sold off the Port of Darwin to a Chinese government state-backed company. So, and that's not the only one. I mean, they sold off massive sections of the Port of Newcastle, which is the largest coal exporting port in the entire world. They sold off a section of the Port of Melbourne. So key pieces of national security infrastructure have been sold off. Massive sections of Australian land, pastoral land, massive tracts of Australian water, etc., have been sold off. Chinese state-backed companies have bought up massive cotton farms, and these cotton farms are environmentally destructive. They drain a lot of the Murray-Darling Basin. It's been ecologically devastating to massive parts of the Australian continent. And so, you know, the government talks very, very tough on China, and yet, on the other hand, they allow this basically pillaging to occur. They allow the Chinese government to just come in and just buy up massive sections of Australian land. In Tasmania recently, we were protesting because the Tarkine rainforest, which is this pristine ancient rainforest, some of these trees, you know, date back thousands upon thousands of years. And the Liberal government in Australia has allowed a Chinese state-backed company to come in and buy up an Australian mine. And they want to build a tailings dam. So basically bury about the rough size of the tailings dam would be about 300 football pitches. They want to bury about 300 football pitches worth of pristine ancient Australian rainforest in Tasmania, some of the most beautiful, untouched, pristine wilderness in the world. They want to bury it under a lake of toxic sludge.
They're doing that in Tasmania? The devils.
Yes. I mean, like, Tasmania, I get your point. I mean, that's a good one.
Thank you.
I mean,
Thank you.
that is a good one.
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah.
Real quick, I just want to clarify for our American audiences. In Australia, the Liberal Party is what we would call the Conservative Party, and the Labor Party is what we would consider the more liberal party.
It would be our Democratic Party.
Yeah, that's a rough approximation. I agree, and I mean it's a problem because I think both major parties, to an extent, have been co-opted by massive flows of Chinese donations, Chinese business money. I mean, both major parties have had scandals where their MPs have been placed under ASIO investigation. So the Labor Party infamously had the Sam Dastyari scandal, where this really prominent Labor politician basically changed his position on the South China Sea in return for donations from Huang Xiaomo, this huge Chinese government-backed oligarch who came to Australia, started buying up massive tracts of Australian property, Australian land. So Labor Party had that infamous massive scandal. The Liberal Party, Gladys Liu, this is a Liberal MP that we've been campaigning a lot at this election, and Gladys Liu has basically been placed under ASIO investigation in the past because money she has donated, she has sourced for the Liberal Party, hundreds of thousands of dollars, have been flagged by ASIO as massive national security threats due to, Chinese government influence. She's been spotted she's been photographed next to men who've been shown to be Chinese spies. She's been photographed next to a guy who came out. He said that the Chinese government offered him $1 million to infiltrate the Australian Parliament. He wound up dead in a Melbourne hotel room under suspicious circumstances. Gladys Liu was photographed at a fundraiser at her home next to this man sitting next to her. I mean, she's been placed under ASIO investigation in the past. She was the chair of United Front Bodies. She was a member of these organizations for a very long time. She was the chair of these organizations. And on live national television, she refused to call Xi Jinping a dictator. So when she was pressed about her links to the United Front, she said that she didn't remember. She didn't recall this decades-long association. And then when she was pressed about whether she would, criticize Xi Jinping, whether she would say he's a dictator, she said, "Oh no, he's not a dictator in their system. He's an elected chairman."
Wow.
This is imagine, a Republican congressman or senator, saying something like that in America. She was actually being interviewed by Sky News, which is I guess the Australian equivalent of Fox News. So imagine a Republican congressman or senator going on Fox News and being pressed, is Xi Jinping a dictator? And they respond, well, he's an elected chairman in their system.
We actually kind of had that. I mean, when Michael Bloomberg, who was running for president as a Democrat, he was like, oh, Xi Jinping's not a dictator. He's got constituents he's got to please. It's like, yeah, but he's a dictator. But of course, he didn't actually win. I mean, he was mayor of New York for 12 years, but he didn't He didn't win the Democratic primary. But yeah, I mean, we've had that, but he wasn't under investigation from the FBI, which is kind of the equivalent of ASIO.